I used to think I was living the kind of life people envied. My name is Ryan Mercer, and until a few months ago, I believed I had everything a man could reasonably ask for. A growing renovation business, a 2-story house in the quiet town of Maple Ridge, a backyard big enough for summer parties and winter bonfires, and a wife who could turn every head when she walked into a room. Her name was Olivia. Beautiful, sharp-tongued, always put together. She had a way of making people feel like they were lucky just to be near her. And I was the luckiest of all, or so I thought. The night everything began to unravel was warm and sticky, the kind of late summer evening where the air clings to your skin. Our neighbor Karen was hosting one of her legendary barbecues. She loved being the center of attention, and her parties were always crowded, loud, and full of gossip. Olivia thrived in that environment. She floated from group to group, laughing, touching shoulders, throwing her head back dramatically when she found something funny. I stayed near the grill with a beer, talking to a couple of guys about roofing materials and lumber prices. Nothing exciting, but it was familiar, comfortable. At some point, I went inside to grab more ice. That's when I heard it. Voices drifting from the laundry room, low and conspiratorial. I recognized them instantly. Olivia and her best friend, Brooke. Those two were inseparable, the kind of women who shared every detail of their lives. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when I heard my own name, I froze. "He has no idea," Olivia whispered, amusement dripping from her voice. Brooke giggled. "You're terrible. Does Ryan really not suspect anything?" "Please," Olivia scoffed. "He barely notices I exist anymore. Always working, always tired. Victor understands me. He gives me attention. He gives me possibilities." My chest tightened. Victor Hale, her boss, a wealthy commercial developer who had recently expanded into Maple Ridge. He was charismatic, polished, and wealthy enough to buy the entire neighborhood without blinking. The kind of man who made other men feel small just by standing near him. Brooke lowered her voice. "So, when are you going to tell him?" Olivia sighed dramatically. "Soon. I want it to be a surprise." A surprise. The words made my stomach twist. I stepped back silently and returned to the backyard, trying to act normal. But the world had shifted under my feet. The beer tasted sour. The laughter around me felt sharp and cruel. Olivia caught my eye across the yard and smiled, radiant and confident. I suddenly wondered how many smiles she had shared with Victor. After that night, the cracks began to widen. Small things I'd ignored started standing out. Olivia dressing up more for work, staying late, keeping her phone face down, whispering in another room, showering immediately after coming home. I kept trying to convince myself that I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. But then I saw the calendar notification. She had left her laptop open on the kitchen island while she showered. A reminder popped up in the corner of the screen. OB/GYN appointment, 3:15 p.m. My heart lurched. We weren't trying to have a baby. We hadn't even talked about kids in over a year. And if she were pregnant, wouldn't she tell me? I stared at the screen for a long time, my pulse hammering. There was only one way to find out. The next day, I followed her. I told the crew I was picking up materials and took my truck across town, keeping several cars behind her white SUV. She drove to a clinic I recognized, Lakeview Women's Health. My palms were sweating as I watched her go inside. I waited in the parking lot, every minute stretching out painfully. When she finally came out, She wasn't alone. She stopped near the entrance, pulling out her phone, laughing softly. I cracked the window just enough to hear. "Yes, Victor," she said, voice honey sweet. "Everything's fine. The doctor says the baby is healthy." My vision blurred. "Baby?" She paused, listening. "Of course it's yours. Ryan hasn't touched me in months." The world went silent. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. All I remember is the cold certainty settling in my gut. She was pregnant. And it wasn't mine. That evening, when she came home, I was waiting at the kitchen table. She looked surprised to see me. "You're home early." "We need to talk," I said. Those 4 words have a weight to them. She stiffened, mask slipping for a moment before she forced a smile. "About what?" "About your appointment today." Her eyes widened. "You followed me?" "No," I lied. "Your laptop told me." The facade cracked. She leaned back, arms crossed. "Fine, yes, I'm pregnant." "And the father?" Silence. Then calmly, "Victor." Something inside me snapped. Not anger, but clarity. "Why?" I asked. She sighed, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Victor offers me security, status, a future. You're comfortable, Ryan. But you'll never be more than what you are. He sees potential in me. He invests in me. And I don't? You don't even look at me anymore." I stared at her, stunned. "So your solution was to get pregnant with another man's child?" She shrugged. "At least he cares." That was it. "Pack your things," I said quietly. "You're leaving tonight." She laughed, disbelieving. "You can't be serious." "I am." When she realized I wasn't bluffing, the anger came. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "Victor won't let you humiliate me." I stood and opened the front door. "Get out." She moved slowly, deliberately, taking her time with every item she packed, pausing to look at me smugly, as if expecting me to break down and beg. I didn't. When she finally left, slamming the door behind her, the house fell silent. For the first time in years, I was alone. And I had no idea that the real nightmare hadn't even begun. The first few days after Olivia left were strangely peaceful. I thought I'd feel devastated, angry, broken, but instead there was a numb quiet inside me, like my emotions had gone into hiding. I worked long hours, repaired the broken step on the porch, cleaned the garage, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from replaying her words. "You'll never be more than what you are." They echoed at night, when the silence of the house became suffocating. Still, I tried to move forward. I didn't answer her texts. I ignored the missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I blocked her on social media, when pictures of her smiling beside Victor began appearing. The town moved on, as towns always do. But Victor didn't. It was a Thursday night when everything changed. I was asleep on the couch, a muted TV casting flickering shadows across the room. The house was dark, quiet, too quiet. I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. Headlights swept across the window. My stomach tightened. Nobody visited at midnight in Maple Ridge. Not unless something was very wrong. I stood, moving quietly toward the front door. Before I reached it, someone pounded. 3 heavy blows that rattled the frame. I froze. Another hit. Louder. "Open the door, Mercer." The voice was low, rough, too familiar. Grant Morrison. Victor Hale's head of security. Former military. Built like a brick wall with a shaved head and eyes that looked dead even when he smiled. The kind of man who enjoyed violence. I didn't move. I wasn't stupid. "Ryan," he called again, tone almost friendly. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. I backed toward the kitchen, reaching for my phone. The back window shattered. Glass exploded onto the floor as two men in dark jackets climbed through, moving fast and efficient like they'd done this before. I barely got the phone unlocked before one of them grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. Pain shot up to my shoulder, forcing me to drop the phone.
"Easy, boys," Grant said, as he stepped inside through the now open door, wiping his boots on my rug like he owned the place. "We're just here to have a conversation." He walked toward me slowly, smiling. "Victor doesn't appreciate you throwing his pregnant girlfriend out like trash," he said. "He expects an apology. Public, preferably." I stared at him, forcing steadiness into my voice. "She's my wife." Grant shrugged. "Not anymore." He leaned in close, breath smelling of whiskey. "And that baby? That's his, which makes her his property." Something in me snapped. "Go to hell." The next moment was a blur. I shoved the man holding me and swung blindly at Grant. My fist connected with his jaw, surprising us both. He stumbled back, eyes flashing with sudden rage. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled. Then the world erupted. A fist slammed into my ribs, another into my stomach. Someone grabbed my hair and yanked my head back. Grant drove his knee into my side so hard I heard something crack. I dropped to the floor, coughing, vision swimming. "Pick him up," Grant ordered. They dragged me toward the door. I tried to fight, to plant my feet, to grab something, anything, but my body wasn't responding. Outside, the night air was cold, sharp. A black SUV idled in the driveway. They shoved me inside, wedging me between two of the men. Grant climbed into the front passenger seat and turned around, grinning. "You had a good thing, Mercer," he said. "You should have stayed quiet. Victor wanted you out of the way, not punished." He tilted his head. "But then you humiliated her, made her cry, and Victor Hale doesn't let anyone humiliate his woman." The SUV lurched forward, gravel spraying. I tried to focus, to plan, to think, but every breath burned. My ribs felt like they were grinding against each other. Something warm trickled down my forehead. Blood. The men beside me laughed quietly, relaxed, like this was routine. Grant turned back again. "When we're done tonight, you'll apologize. You'll acknowledge the baby is yours. You'll show respect." I spat blood onto the floor. "Never." His smile faded. "Then we'll adjust your attitude." We drove out of town, past the darkened gas station, past the old mill, deeper into the woods. The road turned to dirt, then to nothing. The engine cut off. The men dragged me out. Cold air slapped my skin, sobering me slightly. The forest stretched around us, black, silent, endless. Grant stepped close. "Strip." I blinked. "What?" He nodded to the others. "Teach him." Hands tore at my clothes, ripping fabric, pulling, until I stood shivering in nothing but my underwear, feet sinking into damp earth. The cold was brutal, sinking into my bones instantly. Grant circled me like a predator. "You think you're tough," he said softly, "but you're nobody. Victor lets you breathe because it amuses him." He pulled a knife from his belt, the blade catching what little moonlight existed. My heart hammered. He pressed the flat side of the blade against my cheek. "This could go very differently," he murmured. "But Victor wants you alive, just educated." He nodded again. The beating resumed. Punches, kicks, boots slamming into my ribs, my back, my legs. I curled, instinctive, trying to protect my head.
but they grabbed my arms and held me upright so each blow landed clean. Pain became everything. When it finally stopped, I collapsed, gasping. Grant crouched beside me. Last chance. You apologize. You claim the kid. You stay out of Victor's way. I forced my eyes open, tasting blood. No. He exhaled slowly. Then freeze. They dragged me to a tree, wrapped rough rope around my wrists, pulling until my shoulders burned. Bark dug into my skin, scraping raw. Then they left. The SUV's headlights swept across the clearing as they drove away, leaving me naked, broken, tied to a tree in the middle of the forest. The darkness closed in. The cold was relentless. Every breath felt like knives. Time blurred into a haze of shivering and pain. My wrists bled where the rope rubbed. I tried to move, to keep from going still, but exhaustion pulled at me like gravity. I don't know how long I hung there. Minutes, hours. I only know that at some point survival instinct kicked in. If I stopped moving, I would die. I twisted my wrists, grinding the rope against the bark, tearing skin. The pain was unbearable, but slowly, millimeter by millimeter, the rope loosened. When it finally slipped free, I fell forward into the dirt, shaking uncontrollably. Somehow, I stood. Somehow, I walked. Branches tore at my skin. My feet went numb. My vision faded in and out. But I kept moving, driven by something primal and furious. I would not die in these woods. Not for Victor Hale, not for Olivia. Not like this. Dawn was breaking when I saw headlights in the distance. A truck slowed, then stopped. The driver's door opened. "Holy hell," a voice said. "Son, what happened to you?" I blinked up through the blur. A rugged man in his 60s stared down at me, wearing a worn sheriff's jacket. Pete Hoffman, a retired cop, local legend. The kind of man who knew everyone's secrets. He didn't hesitate. "Get in the truck," he said firmly. "You're safe now." I collapsed into his arms. And in that moment, one thought cut through the pain. Victor Hale had no idea what he had just created. He thought he'd broken me. But all he'd done was give me purpose. Revenge, cold, patient, devastating. And I would not stop until his entire world burned. Pete didn't take me to a hospital. At first, I thought he was insane. I could barely stand. My ribs felt like shattered glass, and every inhale sent a burning shock through my chest. But he shook his head when I tried to speak. "No hospitals," he muttered. "Victor's got people in all of them. You show up there, and those bastards will finish the job." He was right. Victor Hale didn't leave loose ends. So instead he drove me to an old cabin deep in the woods, tucked behind a rusted gate on his private land. The place smelled like pine and smoke, with stacks of firewood against the wall and a shotgun mounted above the fireplace. It felt safe, or as safe as I could feel in that moment. Pete laid me on a worn leather couch, wrapped me in blankets, and started heating water on a wood stove. "Why are you helping me?" I whispered, voice barely recognizable. Pete paused, staring into the steam rising from the pot. "Because Victor thinks he owns this town," he said quietly. "He's been running roughshod over good people for years." And someone finally stood up to him. He looked at me then. Really looked. And because I've seen what happens when men like him go unchecked. There was a heaviness in his tone, a memory he didn't share. He cleaned the cuts on my face, taped my ribs as best he could, and gave me painkillers strong enough to make the edges of agony blur. "You need to rest," he said. But rest wasn't what I wanted. All I saw when I closed my eyes was Grant's smirk. Olivia's cold dismissal. Victor's smug ownership. No. Rest could wait. I woke hours later to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, my mind tricked me into believing life was normal again. That Olivia would walk into the room smiling, kiss my forehead, tell me she loved me. Then the memory slammed back, sharp and cruel. Pete noticed me stirring. "You look better," he said. "I feel like ground meat." He snorted. "That's accurate." I tried to sit up, groaning as pain flared across my torso. Pete set 2 mugs on the table. "Tell me everything." So I did. The party, the whispers, the appointment at the clinic, the phone call, the confrontation, the kidnapping, the humiliation. By the time I finished, Pete's jaw was clenched so hard I could see muscles twitching. "That son of a bitch," he muttered. "Victor's been buying loyalty for years. Cops, councilmen, business owners. Thought he owned the whole damn town. He nearly killed me." Pete leaned back. "He didn't kill you, because killing you would cause a problem. But humiliating you? Breaking you? That sends a message." He tapped the table. "Which means you have leverage." I frowned. "What leverage?" Pete's expression sharpened into something predatory. "You lived." Over the next few days, while my body slowly healed, Pete and I talked. About Victor, about his businesses, about the people he controlled. Pete had spent decades as a police officer in Redwood Cove, and though he was retired, he still had connections. He knew who owed Victor money, who feared him, who pretended to admire him, and more importantly, who hated him. "You want to hurt Victor?" Pete said one night as we sat by the fire. "You go after his structure, his reputation, his control." He leaned forward. "You don't fight a man like him with fists. You fight him with information." That sentence changed something in me. Before, all I'd wanted was to punch Victor until he regretted ever meeting me. But now I saw a bigger picture. Victor wasn't just a man. He was an empire. He had a real estate network, construction contracts with the county, investments in local businesses, and political influence. Destroying him physically wouldn't mean anything. Destroying his world? That would be justice. "First target," Pete said, tapping a photograph he'd spread across the table. "Grant Morrison, the man who'd tied me to the tree, the man who'd laughed as I bled in the dirt, the man who called Olivia property." Rage burned through me like gasoline. "Where is he?" Pete smiled slightly. "Local bar. Drinks himself stupid most nights after closing." Perfect. 3 nights later, we waited in Pete's truck outside a run-down bar on the edge of town. The parking lot was dimly lit, littered with cigarette butts and beer bottles. At 1:47 a.m., the door swung open, and Grant stumbled out, alone, weaving slightly. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and immediately passed out, forehead hitting the steering wheel. Pete's eyes flicked to me. "You sure about this?" I nodded. This wasn't revenge for Olivia. This was for me. For the ropes. For the cold. For the bruises and blood and terror. We moved fast. Grant never fully woke. We tied his hands and feet, gagged him, and shoved him into the back of his own SUV. Pete drove to the outskirts of town, stopping near a fishing dock, where the air reeked of salt and old nets. We opened the back. Grant blinked awake, confused, then furious. "What the—" I leaned in close. "Remember me?" Recognition dawned. His eyes widened, then narrowed with hatred. "You're dead," he growled. Victor won't save you," I interrupted. He tried to lunge, but the restraints held. I smiled. A cold, unfamiliar expression on my own face. You taught me humiliation, I whispered. Now I'm returning the favor. Pete popped open a cooler. Grant's eyes darted to it. Then panic flooded his features. Shrimp. Hundreds of them. Rotting. We dumped them into the SUV around him, the stench overwhelming. Grant thrashed violently, muffled screams filling the night. I lifted my phone, clicked a picture, then another. Pete opened the SUV's sunroof and tossed more seafood inside. "Enjoy the aroma," he said dryly. We shut the doors, locked them, and walked away. By morning, someone would find him. The photos would already be online. His reputation, his precious toughness, gone. When we got back to the truck, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from power. Pete studied me. "You feeling better?" I stared out into the darkness, breathing hard. "No," he nodded. "Good. That means you're not done yet." He started the engine. "Next," he said, "we go after the king. Victor Hale." My blood turned cold and electric at the same time. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war. And I intended to win. I stood in the courtroom in Brighton, hands shaking. But not from fear anymore. From clarity. For the first time in months, I felt like I was breathing clean air. Amelia sat across from me, her perfectly rehearsed tears on display, clutching tissues like props. Next to her was Lucas Trent, the man who had destroyed everything I thought my family was. He kept his head down, but I could feel his smugness radiating. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd crumble. The judge cleared his throat. "The DNA evidence clearly establishes that Mr. Mason Carter is not the biological father." The words hit me like a hammer. But instead of breaking, something inside finally snapped free. I wasn't chained anymore. The judge continued. "Therefore, Mr. Carter is relieved of financial responsibility and parental obligations." Amelia gasped, her head jerking toward me. "What? No, he can't just walk away." I turned to her slowly, meeting her furious, panicked eyes. "You made sure I was never a father," I whispered. "That was your choice, not mine." Her face twisted, mascara streaking downward. "You loved him. You raised him," she screamed. I swallowed hard, because the truth hurt. I did love that little boy, but I loved myself too, and I deserved a life that wasn't built on lies. The judge banged the gavel, ending the hearing. Lawyers murmured, papers shuffled, chairs scraped, and just like that, it was over. Not with justice, not with satisfaction, but with release. When I walked out of the courthouse, the Brighton air was cold and salty, blowing in from the sea. I stood on the stone steps, staring at the gray waves in the distance. For a moment, I felt hollow. I had lost a wife. I had lost a child. I had lost the life I thought was real. But then slowly, the emptiness filled with something else. Possibility. Freedom. A future that belonged to me, not built on deception. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister, Claire. "Proud of you. Dinner tonight? We'll celebrate the beginning, not the end." I smiled for the first time in what felt like years. That evening, as I sat surrounded by people who truly cared about me, I realized something important. The tragedy wasn't that Amelia cheated. The tragedy was how long I let myself ignore the truth. I lifted my glass. "To honesty," I said. "To starting over." They raised theirs in return. Later that night, alone in my small new apartment overlooking the harbor, I stood by the window and watched the lights reflect on the water. I wasn't the same man who once installed hidden cameras in desperation. I wasn't the man begging for love from someone who never valued me. I was someone rebuilding, someone choosing himself. and as painful as the journey had been, I finally felt alive. This wasn't the ending of my story. It was the beginning of the one I was meant to live.